Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Today we delve into doing business with Vietnam. Canada-Vietnam two-way trade was at $10.5 billion, and Vietnam is gaining importance as supply chains seek resiliency in the wake of China's issues. I'm pleased to welcome George Milic to Boom and Bust. George is a Canadian businessman, president of Stablewood Financial. He spends part of his year in Vietnam and comes to us today from Nha Trang. Welcome to the show.
Tony, great to be here. As I said just a little earlier, before we begin, congratulations on the show. It's really, really good. And you hit on a lot of good topics. It's different every week. And, we've talked about this for some time to get me on, and I'm delighted to be here. So.
Well, you keep talking like that, you'll be on a lot more. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. First of all, maybe, of course, I know what you're up to, but maybe tell our audience a little bit about what you do in Vietnam. What kind of work are you involved with?
By all means, and I'll just give a bit of a background, Tony, for your listeners, your audience. Starting around 2000, I started coming to Asia, interested for many years to experience the culture, socially have some fun, see what the opportunities were. And that's 23 years now. And about 10, 11 years ago, on a visa run, I came to Vietnam. And I noticed on my travels on a visa run, a lot of cranes, a lot of developments, a lot of progress happening in this country called Vietnam. And I've committed in the last number of years, I decided to be part of that growth. And so I traveled between Canada and Vietnam in the Asian marketplace for the last 7-8 years. And I've been involved in 3 or 4 principal businesses that I've been involved in. So at the time, Tony, when I made that decision, when I first came to Vietnam, you'd see the cranes and whatnot. You'd see the people and their work and whatnot. What was really interesting was every year I would come back, and it's an unusual observation, but it's one I made. You never saw Mercedes, you never saw BMWs, Range Rovers, or Ferraris. All of a sudden, within 4 or 5 years, you had this burgeoning middle and upper class in Vietnam making money. Sort of like the small tiger compared to the Chinese market.
Right.
And I just saw that progress going on and on. Vietnam, population of 100 million. It's a very young population. I've traveled many places in the world. It's a very hardworking population. And by observation and through friends and social contacts and business contacts you make over the years here, many of the homes now have, beautiful TVs and more cars on the road. It's really a country with a very bright future.
Right.
So the areas you were asking, sorry, go ahead. Please.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask your observations on the business culture as well.
Well, there's much we can talk about the business culture. I was born and raised in Toronto, North America, Canada, the United States. And, there is a different culture here. If you don't have the right connections based on how you've engaged with people socially and in business, and you don't have those connections to the right businesses and the right political contacts over here, you're not going to get very far. Whereas in Canada, it's just as important, but there are a number of different differences too. I do find, Tony, in my experiences, that I will have purchase orders, let's say in Canada, the United States, and you approach a company in Canada, the United States, you're going to get a response within a day or 2 or 3 or 4, especially if it's meaningful business. That's not the case here. I've had situations where I've had purchase orders of most meaningful nature and not gotten a response. It's remarkable. Notwithstanding putting forth to to the interested party or parties in
Right.
company,
Right.
your professional background, etc. So it is quite different.
Right.
And
Right.
like many things in life, it's about relationships.
Sure. We'll be right back with our guest. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with George Milic. He is the president of Stablewood Financial, coming to us from Nha Trang, Vietnam. George, I wanted to get into a little bit more detail on some of your business activities. Can you give us more of a taste of what sort of business you're involved in and how that relates to the Vietnamese economy?
Sure, I'm pleased to do so, Tony. There's 3 or 4 primary areas that I've been focusing on and I'm currently involved in. An example right at this time, I'm representing an international client looking for 2 specific types of petroleum for his company and for distribution. So we're looking right now internationally. I've been working right up to 2 hours ago. We are 12 hours ahead of you right now in Toronto Eastern Standard Time. So we're 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. And so I'm making overtures to my international petroleum contacts for these 2 specific petroleum products of a very substantial nature. So that's one area that I've been involved in and am currently involved in right up to 2-3 hours ago. If anyone watching this program, of course, we always vet appropriately, has a supply of petroleum in 2 specific forms, which we won't get into right now. Most welcome that response back.
Sure.
Another area, Tony, which primarily brought me over here was to raise capital internationally for real estate and infrastructure programs.
Right.
Specific in the Asian marketplace, but specifically in Vietnam, and more specifically in Saigon, also referred to as Ho Chi Minh. The country, as I explained, is really, notwithstanding recessions and changes in currencies, etc., interrelationships with other countries here in this region, is very well poised, anywhere from 4 to 7% growth going forward. And you see that in Saigon. And so what I did spend a good part of my year, again, back and forth from Canada and Vietnam, in District 1 in Ho Chi Minh, raising capital and bringing capital in for various infrastructure and real estate projects. Also involved in 2 remaining areas. One is we have clients here who are very much interested in Canadian and United States lumber to be imported from the United States, Canada, back to Vietnam for the building of specialty furniture. And so I've been involved with that as well. And lastly, good fortune. Again, you spend time here, you end up meeting, if you're intent on doing business and good quality business. I had the opportunity to meet a supplier of all things lobster, Vietnamese farm-raised green lobster that is raised in seawater, not fresh, no STP used. And I'm dealing with a Japanese purchaser who's interested in 30 tons,
Right.
not 1 ton, 30 tons of this premium lobster that is freshly frozen and then transported. So those are 3 or 4 of the areas that I'm currently involved in.
And what would you see as the high growth areas in the Vietnamese economy? Is it a lot of it is in manufacturing or real estate, or where do you see as the growth areas?
Both those areas, Tony. I think one of your questions later will be, I think we had a pre-talk some time ago, was about China.
Right.
Well, China's loss is Vietnam's beneficiary. Apple, as an example of manufacturing, has shifted a high percent of their production to the Vietnamese market to do their productions. And there are other areas as well, but also real estate too. I spoke about earlier. Again, generally speaking, notwithstanding the COVID period, we can talk about that if you like. Pre-COVID and now post-COVID, you're seeing cranes everywhere. You're seeing the completion after 14 years of a new metro line through the heart of Saigon. Population 12 million, and it's almost finished. And again, as I said, I spent part of the year in 2019 in Ho Chi Minh, Saigon, working for a development company that had properties right on the metro line. So those are two areas that are very positive. And again, for those that are intelligent enough to understand the opportunities, there they are.
We're going to take another brief break, George. We've got lots to talk about, and we do have time to do so, so don't worry about that. But this will be a time for our commercial sponsors. Please stay with us. We'll be back after these messages. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm here with George Milic. He is president of Stablewood Financial. He is coming to us from Nha Trang, Vietnam. George, you mentioned in the previous segment just about COVID. I'd love to get your sense of how that affected things economically and socially in Vietnam, and now what's happening in the post-COVID environment.
You know, it's a very valuable question because Vietnam borders China, and I happen to be here because of the work in Ho Chi Minh, and then transferred back and forth to Canada, but also one of the bases being here in an office we retain here in Nha Trang. So I was here for that. You started hearing about it around Valentine's here, February 14th, 2020, and immediately the border was shut by the Vietnamese government with the Chinese. And since then, Tony, even to this day, prior to that, there were buses lined up. In my telecommuting and moving around the city here, very difficult to move around, many, many buses. And all of a sudden it just stopped. Nothing, no one. And I will say, I must give credit. I give credit, by the way, to President Trump, who, notwithstanding people saying things that were not true, took immediate action and the right action. And I'm thankful for that. I must commend, at the time, Prime Minister Phuc, it's now Prime Minister Chin, but President Phuc immediately cut the border off. So we did not experience here an explosion of COVID. There were cases, but they were very isolated. And everyone got their shots and adhered to that. But last year, it finally caught up. And why? Because the vaccine, we were at the front end, we being the Vietnamese government was at the front end of prevention of the Chinese coming to spread COVID. But unfortunately, and they really did their best, it was very difficult. They were at the latter end of that on the vaccines. And so there was a longer layout for that, and that caused issues. Only now, in the last, as I've sensed and experienced now in the business that I'm doing, only now are things post-COVID, if I can use that term. The business communities, internationally and domestically, are much more receptive to dealing with one another. I will finish, Tony, by saying that we had a very important project that I had brought a very large investor that we were 4 months into in 2019 into early 2020 in District 3 of Ho Chi Minh, Saigon. And as soon as that first 2 weeks came of COVID, end of discussions. They said we're not going to travel, we're putting it on hold. So it wasn't great for business, but it's been difficult for many, as I do appreciate.
Sure.
We're now getting better, sort of back to normal a bit.
Let's talk a little bit more about supply chains too. You mentioned Apple moving some of their supply chain. Are you seeing other examples of that where you're seeing a shift in supply chains to Vietnam as a sort of a safe haven?
Yes. Again, it all is a reflection of the world's attitude towards China. This is no surprise. They're having their own issues right now that are significant. And the relationship between China and Vietnam is a very complex relationship, as I've learned over the years. The Vietnamese do appreciate the travel by the Chinese pre-COVID, certainly not now yet, that hasn't returned. They appreciate the the dollars, the currency that comes from that. But then there's the other side of the coin in terms of their Chinese interest in land and their interests that they may claim at sea in the quote South China Sea, which creates some concern,
Right.
understandably. So that's one of the areas that I would, but I would say from manufacturing standpoint, from an investment and real estate standpoint, Vietnam is moving in the right direction right now. That's clear to me. And again, as I've said earlier, a tremendous future. It's a small version of China with a government that seems far more, that being the Vietnamese government, far more interested in engaging professionals to make this country better socially and economically. There are issues. I don't think we need to get into that at this time, but that seems to be their interest. And I can speak very positively in regards to that. So.
No, I appreciate you saying that, and indeed, this does confirm some of the other evidence we've had on the show earlier about these shifts in supply chain that we're seeing before our eyes. We're going to take one more break, and then we'll be back with our guest. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having this great conversation with George Milic. He is president of Stablewood Financial. You can find them at stablewoodfinancial.com. And George is coming to us from Nha Trang, Vietnam. George, I'd love to get your opinion on Canada-Vietnam trade. Are there more opportunities for Canadians and Canadian businesses to do more in Vietnam?
Well, obviously my answer would be, and you wouldn't be surprised to hear this, the answer is yes. I could give you an example. In 2019, I worked for a small but very influential real estate and development infrastructure company in the Texaco Financial Tower in District 1, which is our version of Bay and King. Basically, they had an interest in various projects and whatnot. And I made an introduction to one of the representatives when they went back to Canada, to Tridel. Tridel, as we all know, one of the absolute finest companies, certainly in Canada, if not the world, in building residential homes, etc. The Delzato family. And I put this one representative, who was one of the owners of the company, in front one full afternoon with the senior executives and owners of the company. Because they had expressed an interest. This is 2019, pre-COVID. And they expressed an interest, but said, we'll get back to you, but we're interested. Well, we've never heard back. I mean, I can't think of a better company that would make an absolute fortune with the right introductions to this growing, expanding economy in Vietnam, not just Vietnam, but the Asian marketplace, notwithstanding issues with China and notwithstanding a potential recession coming at us this year or next year. I'm looking longer term, 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years, which Tridel does. And so I'm using that as an example. It has to come, Tony, from someone who under a company or individual of a company that understands and appreciates what is happening over here.
Right.
To be honest, I don't have time spending a great deal of time educating unless it's really worth it. Medium-sized companies on the advantage or smaller companies' advantages over here. I don't have time for that. You either get it or you don't. I'll let someone else explain it. Of course, I'll spend that time if we have a meaningful transaction or an executive of a company or company that wants to expand their interests in Vietnam. Well, we're here to make those introductions and whatnot.
We've got a couple of minutes left. Do you have some other advice, some recommendations for businesses who are thinking about doing business in Vietnam, some do's and don'ts? Yeah,
well, I'll give you the main one. If you don't have a contact here in Vietnam or the Asian marketplace, and many businessmen and businesswomen will know this who are already here, expats I refer to, those from Canada, those from the United States, those from England, those from Australia. If you don't have someone who's dedicated to do their business here and act as a facilitator and has already developed good relationships with local, provincial, and or national government representatives and businessmen who have ties to those, you're not going to get very far. So I can only speak for myself. We've been here for 7, 8 years. I've had the honor of, in certain cases, dealing directly with the Prime Minister's office on certain important infrastructure transactions in Saigon. And I can't say how important that is to get the paperwork done. I don't know if we have more time.
Yeah, we do. We've got about a minute left. Yeah.
Okay, minute left. I want to raise the issue. In Canada and the United States, it takes years, Tony, because for certain specific projects or infrastructure projects, you get a project approved and move forward and begun and finish. Not in Vietnam as much. So if it's the right project with the right support, government and business, it gets done.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there you go. Well, George, again, you can find George at stablewoodfinancial.com. He's in and out of Vietnam, very well familiar with the territory. George, I want to thank you for taking a little bit of time to be with us today. I know it's 12 hours ahead, so it's not past prime time into the early hours of the morning there, but I really appreciate your attendance here today.
My pleasure, Tony, and I'm sorry about your Montreal Canadiens.
Well,
very sorry.
Yeah. Well, we're going for the first draft pick this year, I think. All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye. That was George Milic coming to us from Nha Trang, Vietnam, talking about doing business in Vietnam, right from his mouth, because he's kind of there on the ground. So great to have a little bit less theory, a little bit more practical. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for watching.